is going to put together some snowy plover docent training. And she was kind enough to reach out to me and say that if we have members of our group who would be interested in being part of that, you can be part of that. So send me an email. I'm going to post about this at carpbirdwatchers.org probably tomorrow morning. And I'll be reaching out to the people who helped with watching the snowy plovers last year. There's a number of you who volunteered then. So one way or the other, you should be hearing from me. And if any of you are interested in being part of a snowy plover docent training, I don't think there's any, it's a no obligation thing. You can just do it to learn about snowy plovers without having to actually go out and volunteer, I'm sure. But I'll get more details about that over the next few days, and I'll put updates about that at carpbirdwatchers.org. So I think that is it for Linda Rose, and she's waiting in the waiting room. I think that's about it for announcements. Does anyone have anything they want to share before we jump into Better Identifications Part 2? Any exciting birding? Yeah, Michelle, I see you're muted. If you unmute, we can hear your news.
Okay, I actually walked along the beach this morning and spoke to the state park, Dax, I think his name was, who was guarding the plovers. I couldn't believe that they've extended the area by orange cones, because the birds themselves are not staying with, they aren't reading the instructions
right
behind the tape. So they were way down the beach and they had extended a coned off area by about probably 6 or 8 feet beyond the, the wire fencing. I was walking along that way trying to spot them under the fence and almost stumbled on them. They were just right in front of me on the sand, 1 adult and 2 chicks. So I was really, oh my God, I nearly stood on them. So then when I came back the way, he had already been out and put the cones out. So they really are doing a great job of protecting them.
That's great. Yeah, great to hear. And that's what happened last year too. I think the roped off area is kind of just to help people stay back from the nest.
Right.
But once the babies hatch, they're precocial. They're out running around the beach catching kelp flies and sandhoppers, and they don't respect the rope boundary. They're just going wherever their mood takes them. So yeah, it's very helpful to have people down there to point out that, oh, there's a little tiny adorable bird here. Maybe you should not step on it. Okay, anything else before we go on to the IDs? Okay, well then with that, I will go ahead and see if I can launch the screen share. I always must talk about it. Just have to narrate what I'm doing or I'll just forget right in the middle of it. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so with any luck, you are seeing my my slide. Mm-hmm. Thumbs up if you see my slide. Okay, yeah. Excellent. Okay, so let's see. This is, as it says, part 2 on rarities and reporting. And there is the orchard oriole. So I saw that bird, well, presumably it's that bird, just a couple days ago. So pro tip for those going out on the Little Big Day on Saturday, this male orchard oriole that's on Santa Monica Creek has started vocalizing a lot, so it makes him a lot easier to find. So if he's there, you can just pop in there and just spend a few seconds and get that species. So I plan to try to get that species on Saturday. Okay, so this really is going to be a focus on rarities. And again, like the last meeting, this is really more about my personal experience and just kind of where I'm at on my journey of trying to get better at bird IDs and identifying birds. So, if documenting rarities is not something you care about, well, stick with it and maybe we'll have some fun by the end, but that's what I'm going to talk about for now. So when you submit an eBird checklist, if it includes a bird that is rare enough, we talked about this in the last meeting, it will trip the rarity filters, which have been defined by the local eBird reviewers. And it's an indication that, hey, this bird you're reporting is unusual, so we'd like you to document it. And this is part of the data quality process at eBird. They want to try to verify these, especially these rarer sightings, so that they don't have a lot of misidentifications in the data. So they ask when you submit a rarity that you provide additional documentation. And there's a lot of different kinds of documentation you can give. One of the best forms of documentation is either photos or sound recordings. And that really is, the gold standard. If you can do that, you're in great shape, because then the reviewers can actually see or hear the bird themselves, and they can decide, okay, yeah, that seems like a valid ID, or maybe they think it isn't valid, and so they'll mark it as unconfirmed, which is fine. And by the way, when the eBird reviewers mark your sighting as unconfirmed, it doesn't affect you and your eBird list. Like that sighting remains there as part of your eBird data as you use it personally. It just means that it then doesn't show up in searches by other people for that species, and it won't show up if they're doing like scientific research based on distribution. They will exclude those unconfirmed sightings from that data. So photos and sound recordings, if you can get them, are great, and you can upload those to your eBird observation. If you don't have that, all is not lost. They want a description of the bird. And here it's important to understand that, again, it's not, the eBird reviewers are not passing judgment on you personally. It's not about your reputation. It's not about, do they know you? Do they value your opinion? Do they respect your judgment? They just want to know, what did you see? And so in your detail in your eBird observation, if you don't have a photo, is basically going to be describing for them what it was that you saw and heard, and what it was about what you saw and heard that made you believe that was the correct identification. So, a description of the bird, overall size and shape, beak structure. These are some of the things we talked about in the last meeting, with like tricky IDs, the kinds of checklists you go through of things to look at. Colors and plumage, you can put that in the description, what it is that you saw. Habitat and behavior. And this is important, how you eliminated similar species. So again, they're trying to, the eBird reviewers are trying to sort of review your process. They were not there. They did not see the bird. So all they can really go by is your report. And they're very interested in hearing, well, what was your mental process? What things did you see? And were you aware of what similar species needed to be excluded? If there's a more common species that this bird might be confused with, and you don't mention why it was that you thought this was not that common species, that's going to be a red flag. They're going to think, oh, well, maybe it was just this common species and they just didn't realize that there was this other option. So if you mention that in your description, it's helpful. And similarly, they recommend, if you are aware that it's a rarity, you could put that in the description again, so that the reviewers know, oh, you were treating this as a rarity at the time. You're not just assuming that, oh, well, it kind of looks like that picture in the book, so that's probably it. You're aware that there's a higher standard you want to hew to. And then this is something I like to include, information to help others re-find the bird. So eBird doesn't really talk about this in their documentation, but it's something I try to do if it's a rarity, because we have this community of birders in Santa Barbara County who, if one of us sees a good bird and reports it, if it's good enough, if it's rare enough, I know there are other people who are going to want to try to see it. So I try to include enough detail that, I try to include the information that I would want to have if I were chasing this species that someone else had reported, like, where exactly did you see it? Like the eBird, the eBird checklist will give a location, but that might not be specific enough. If you can give a more specific location, like, oh, it was at the Cape Honeysuckle Hedge, just south of the footbridge over Santa Monica. That's an easier thing, to look for. And again, my favorite orchard oriole. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, and again, this is going to, I think, be a fairly quick meeting because I really only have these two topics. But the second topic is misidentifications and sort of how they come about and how to avoid them. And here I'm really just talking about my own experience. So the rest of this meeting is going to be a series of my own errors of judgment, which thanks to eBird, I have a record of, and I can go back and say, oh, well, see, this is what I thought it was, but this is what it really was. But I do think it's important, again, and I talked about this last time, to realize that this is not a moral failing. You know, this is something that just happens to all of us. And it's part of the fun, you know, of trying to make these tricky identifications. Sometimes we get them wrong, but if we learn from those mistakes, it's a positive thing, which is exactly what I just said. Okay, so I like this quote from Pete Dunn in his book, Pete Dunn on Birdwatching. The difference between a beginning birder and an experienced one is that beginning birders have misidentified few birds. Experienced birders have misidentified thousands. So the longer I bird, the more I come to appreciate the truth of that statement. All right, recent misidentifications, some of them, not all of them. So, and there are going to be some very bad photos accompanying this part of the talk. And that's actually significant. You know, I think in a lot of cases, when I have misidentified a bird, a bad photo is involved. You know, if you talk about a very distant photo, a very grainy photo, you know, my imagination can start to interpret that in the way that I want to interpret it, in the way that my subconscious wishes it to be interpreted, and that can get me into trouble. And that's exactly what happened here. So this is a few years ago, and I was very excited. I was looking for broad-winged hawks, and of course we've talked about this before, but in the fall, a small number of broad-winged hawks, which is an eastern species normally, but a small number of them come down the Pacific Flyway every fall. And if you're in the right spot, you can see one if you're lucky. And this Bella Vista Drive overlook up in Montecito is a good spot that Eric Culbertson sort of discovered as a great place to find these hawks. So I was up there in the fall of 2018, and I was very excited to see a broad-winged hawk. So anything that came through, if it wasn't a red-tailed hawk, I was reporting it as a broad-winged hawk. I was like, it's not a red-tailed, it must be a broad-winged hawk. But in this case, no, it was not a broad-winged hawk. This was a Swainson's hawk, which is actually a pretty good bird to get in the fall along the South Coast. And it's interesting to me looking at these images now, now that I have some more experience with Swainson's hawks, even though these are bad photos and distant and grainy, they obviously look, this bird obviously looks like a Swainson's hawk to me. And that's kind of that thing I talked about in the last meeting. As you go from identification to recognition, as you get more familiar with the bird and you can just run through the list of things to look for, the stahedral, the way that wings are angled up a little bit, the relatively pointed wings, the dark flight feathers on the trailing edge of the wing, this sort of darker head and throat area with the lighter body behind it. All of these are sort of our classic adult Swainson's hawk features. Even in a bad photo, you can pick them out. But again, it was an important learning experience for me. You know, I wasn't going through that process. I was just very fixated on seeing a broad-winged hawk. So almost as soon as I was sure that I wasn't a red-tailed hawk, it didn't have the features of a red-tailed hawk, I was looking for things that might confirm it as a broad-winged hawk. And I saw enough here that I was thinking, yeah, it's a broad-winged hawk. And I actually reported it that way in eBird before I was corrected by the helpful reviewers, which was much appreciated, if somewhat embarrassing. So, and that was, when was that? The 21st of September. Okay, so a few days later, 4 days later, pretty much the same spot, just up the hill a little ways at the upper Hawk Watch site right above Bella Vista Drive, I saw another hawk come through, and clearly was not a red-tailed hawk. So again, I got very excited. I reported it as a broad-winged hawk. This time, I really think I got a broad-winged hawk. But again, no. With the few years of experience I've had since then, I've seen this species a lot more, and it's pretty obviously not a broad-winged hawk, but a ferruginous hawk, a light more ferruginous hawk. So again, it was the same. I made the same mistake over again. You know, it wasn't a red tail. I saw a few things that might be shoehorned into broad-winged, and broad-winged was what I really wanted to see. So I decided that's what it was, but I decided that incorrectly. It was in fact a ferruginous hawk. All right, well, a few days later, the 27th of September, actually saw a broad-winged hawk. So this is what I thought I was seeing the other times, but this time I was correct. So persistence. Stopwatch is correct twice a day. If you call enough birds broad-winged hawks, eventually you will actually call a broad-winged hawk a broad-winged hawk. So this was another interesting time. So this was, I went out to San Miguelito Road out south of Lompoc, and it was a really great hawk watch site, one of my favorite spots in the county to go bird watching. It is now a wind farm, and wind energy is important, and you know, we move on. But back in the day, this was a great spot to go see interesting raptors. And so we pulled up, and I looked out the window and I saw this bird, and I knew we'd seen eagles there before. So I confidently announced to Linda, my wife, who was going birding with me that day, "Oh, there's a golden eagle there on the grass." Now, I hadn't really checked it out in detail. I just, you know, it was big, it was dark, it was a big dark raptor. I'd seen golden eagles there. I thought, yeah, it's probably a golden eagle. But as we looked closer, there was a prey item on the ground, and these birds were interacting around there, both going after the same carcass. Here's a red-tailed hawk, which clearly is a red-tailed hawk. Even I could tell that. 2019 me was able to identify it as a red-tailed hawk. And if you know that this is a red-tailed hawk, something's very wrong with this picture if you think that this is a golden eagle. And here's another photo that kind of illustrates that I took at the same location the year before, where a golden eagle was being kind of harassed on the wing by a red-tailed hawk. And if you look at this, you can see that a golden eagle is a great deal bigger than a red-tailed hawk. So if they're both hanging out on the grass like that, that's not what it's going to look like. But I missed that because I was not sufficiently experienced to realize that. And also I was kind of in a hurry. I was getting my spotting scope out. I wasn't really studying the bird. I was, oh yeah, it's a golden eagle. No, it was not a golden eagle. And when it took off and flew, I got a better look at it and figured out, oh no, this is actually a dark morph ferruginous hawk. So that same bird we were looking at before, that was a light morph bird. The dark morph basically looks like this. So structure-wise, it looks just like that other bird, but it has completely different plumage. So that was actually really cool. I was excited to see a dark morph ferruginous hawk. But again, the lesson for me there was just take your time. You know, I need to. There are no shortcuts when you're talking about. You know, when you get to that level where you can very quickly recognize a bird because you're very familiar with it, that's great. Go ahead and do that. But there's a certain discipline required to realize, like in my case, in this case, I was not at that stage with the golden eagles that I was pointing out. So it's best to treat those identifications as a hypothesis that are subject to confirmation. So this is interesting. This was one of the most recent corrections I got from an eBird reviewer. And I actually just got this correct. I got this email about this just a few months ago. So it was sitting there misidentified for a couple of years. This was in Arizona. And one of the few times I birded outside Santa Barbara County. I almost always am birding right around here. But I was on a trip to visit my father, and was there birding with my sister, Meliz, and saw a distant bird, snapped a photo, looked at it, saw what I thought looked like a dark mark on the neck, and thought, oh, that's a Eurasian collared dove, right? And entered it as that and didn't really think much more about it till I got this email from the reviewer in Arizona that basically pointed out that, it's actually got an orange colored beak. And in fact, on subsequent review, we both agreed, yeah, this was actually a band-tailed pigeon. And the fact that it looks like it's got that dark ring is probably an artifact of the bad photo or the lighting, or, I'm not exactly sure. But, I think on balance, what you can see of that sort of yellowish beak is more important than what looks like a dark band on the neck. So anyway. So again, here my mistake, I think, was just being kind of lazy. I was just kind of moving quickly. I wasn't really worrying about it too much, didn't really study the photo carefully. And also, the fact that I was birding outside my normal stomping grounds, this is a common source of misidentifications in the eBird data that the reviewers talk about, that you can be a relatively experienced birder in one spot, and then you go birding somewhere else, and you're still birding, with that familiarity, controlling your identifications, but your experience doesn't necessarily apply to this new location. So you'll find people hearing something and thinking, oh, that's this, because back home when I hear this, it is that. But in this other location, maybe there's another bird that sounds similar that you don't have back home. And so it's important to, at least for me, to remind myself that, when I get out there outside the areas where I'm more familiar with what's around, to slow down a little bit and be a little more careful and realize that, no, I'm a beginner. I'm a beginner at the birds of Guindani Canyon, Arizona, and I don't really know what's likely to be there. So I got to be careful. Okay, and this is actually, I think, the last example, the last good example I was able to find that I know of. I'm sure there are other examples I haven't learned about yet in my eBird submissions that was misidentified. And the lesson here, I think, was pretty clear. So this is a bird. I was chasing the swamp sparrow that had been seen at this particular spot out in, I guess it's kind of like Goleta. It's sort of south of the freeway, but it's Village at Los Carneros is the development. There's a little open space there. And there had been a swamp sparrow seen there over several days. So it's like, oh, great, I need that for my year list. Went out there to look for it. In just the right spot, the exact spot they've been talking about. This bird pops out and it's hopping around. And I gave it a quick look, and yeah, it had some kind of rufous on the wings. And I thought to myself, it sure looks like a Lincoln sparrow. It really looks a lot like a Lincoln sparrow. But I guess that's what a swamp sparrow looks like. I'm not that familiar with swamp sparrows. And I was in a hurry. I had some appointment to get to, so I put in my list and I sent it off. I said, yeah, and there's photos coming later. And so then later, when I downloaded the photos on my computer and loaded them, I took another look at it and probably looked at it more carefully than I had out in the field and said, is that real? That really does look like a Lincoln sparrow. And so then I dug up some photos that other people had taken of the swamp sparrow at this location, and it was clearly a different bird. The head pattern was not right. So in this case, I corrected it myself. So I felt a little bit of a moral victory there that, I'm not even sure anyone else had much of a chance to correct it, because once I got that photo up, I looked and said, oh yeah, that's wrong. And went back there and a week later and got photos of the actual bird. So you could see, that was me, that was wishful thinking, my upgrading that bird into the swamp sparrow, because it clearly was a different bird. I mean, similar on some level, but no, not the same bird. All right, and that is it for that. So as I said, this was going to be a quicker meeting. That's all I've got for slides. I'd be happy to take questions, or if people have, tricky IDs, we could look at some tricky IDs. Last time we looked at Western versus leased sandpipers, and that was kind of fun. We could do something like that again. I don't know. What do folks think? We could also just declare victory and go home early and get busy on getting ready for the Little Big Day in 2 days.
I could just say that gulls still make me a little crazy. So
I agree. And, I'm noticing too, we're getting to the time of year when I like gulls less because they start to get very faded and worn, and, crisply plumaged gulls with their winter plumage, they're hard enough as it is, but when they get all faded and ratty looking and they all look the same, then it's really hard. Yeah. I don't know. Do we want to do a quick gull refresher? Do you have a particular gull pair you'd like to look at? I see Michelle giving a thumbs up.
If that's all right with anyone else, yes.
So let's see. We could whip through the slides from our some of our previous gull meetings. I could still find those. Now, in the past, I had broken those up into the big four, like the common four species, and then 5 more, however many more it was. Any preference on which we look at? Do you want to look at the basic gulls? Do you want to look at the trickier gulls?
I think I like the basic gulls that are always here, if that's all right.
That is entirely
everyone
all right.
else? Okay. Okay, good.
All right, so it's going to take me a second to find this.
Mhm.
Let's see. We had gull, I think it was the gull refresher. Let me look at that meeting really quick that we did most recently. Yeah, it talks about, oh, in fact, I lumped them all together. Let's just use that one, right? And we can just look at the slides we want to look at. Okay. One more time to the sharing. Okay. We're just going to zip through this really quick. So these are the adults, right, of our big four, our 4 species that we have pretty much year round. And again, I encourage people to start with the adults, because if you can get those figured out, they're a really useful roadmap for the immatures, because the immatures are going to be basically the same size and shape as the corresponding adult. So that can really help you, and the adults are easier, they're more distinctive looking. And then, once you've got the adults, they're like your decoder ring, and you can work your way down to the immature ones. So again, we've got our, our Western gulls, the big, powerful gulls, pinkish legs, relatively dark mantle, relatively big beak, sort of swollen towards the tip. This particular photo doesn't show it that well, but and they breed locally. We've got them here all the time, sometimes in big numbers. Western gulls. And then California gulls, which we're kind of getting to the part of the year where we're going to have fewer of them. They're going to migrate, and a lot of them are going to head north and inland. Lately, we're at the time of year where you start seeing like big flocks of gulls flying overhead, even when you're not at the coast. And a lot of time, those are California gulls in migration that they're heading out. But they're a little smaller than the Western gulls, more of a elongated body, kind of tapered, with a longer wing extension, as befits their migratory nature. In general, the rule of thumb with birds is if they migrate long distances, they tend to have longer wings. Western gulls don't migrate in the same way that California gulls do, so they have a more compact body that's more efficient for the kind of short flights they're doing. The mantle is a little lighter than the Western gull mantle. And, I talk about the Western gull mantle shade, but in fact, there are 2 different subspecies of Western gulls that we have around here. The southern subspecies has a really dark mantle, and then the more northern subspecies that we do see a fair number of has a lighter dark mantle. I mean, the mantle is still dark, but it's not as dark. Like on the southern Western gulls, like this dark mantle is almost as dark as the primary tips. It seems like it's like really dark. Then ring-billed gull, a little smaller, a little lighter mantle, more, again, elongated, shorter beak. Like the California gull has this long parallel-sided beak. It doesn't swell as much as the Western gull's beak, but it's noticeably longer than the ring-billed gull's beak. The ring-billed gull's beak, once you start really focusing on it, you can see it's relatively short. It's a cute, petite little beak. Although not as much as the short-billed gull, which I want to call him U-gull because it was named that until recently. And then Heermann's gull, if you see that orange beak, it's a giveaway. Even in the immatures, they'll have a little bit of an orange beak going on. And the really dark legs, those 2 characteristics, just by themselves are enough to tell you it's probably a Heermann's gull. And then it has that dark gray body that's very different from the other adult gulls. Some of the first year Western gulls, the immature Western gulls, they can be pretty dark. Those juvenile birds are very dark, sort of chocolatey brown. And they can kind of look like a Heermann's. It can, be confusing. So that's why, you want to have these other characteristics that you can run through. You want to have your your beak and your legs and all these different things. Eye color. The adult ringbills have these light irises. Adult California has a dark iris. Let's see. That's right. So in this, in that earlier meeting, we went through in detail and I talked about the beak structure, which we just covered. And the leg color. And as we talked about in that earlier meeting, with the field guide or with a photo like this, you just have one look. But the birds out there in the field have as many different looks as there are individual birds. They're all a little bit different. So studying a resource like this is a good starting point, but really the textbook you need to study is out on the beach. Go out there and read the gulls that are actually there and just work your way through them. Again, start with the adults, work your way down to the younger ones. Take your field guide with you or take photos. If you can, gulls will let you get really close. Bring a bag of Fritos and they'll come right up and let you take pictures with your phone. But gulls, I think, really do reward study. And the more you study, the more you kind of learn to recognize them quickly and to also, have a better sense for when you should just back away. I think everybody's in kind of the same boat when it comes to gull identification. We're just, we're all subject to confusion. We're all subject to having to go, yeah, I don't know what that bird is. We're just doing it with slightly different sets of birds. If you're just starting out, they're almost all in that category, but there's still a substantial number of them in that category for me. I know, people who are more expert on gulls, they also, find birds that they say, yeah, I don't know what's happening with this bird. Here's a look at the different ages. And again, this is just one possible sequence. The actual birds in the field have many, many more variations of this sequence. But here's your really young Western gull, that sort of overall dark look I was talking about. Here's a somewhat older Western gull, and still yet older. And then here we are at the adult plumage. And this, it takes about 4 years for a Western gull to get to that adult plumage. But and again, the thing I emphasized before was structure. Like, you have to look at everything with gulls. You have to take all the clues into account, but definitely pay special attention to the structure of the bird, the overall size and shape, and the size and shape of the beak. It's very, very helpful, and it will help clarify things that plumage will just confuse you about. Here's the same sort of sequence for California gull, starting off with a juvenile in the upper left, somewhat older immature in the upper right, subadult bird, but still older in the lower left, and then that adult look in the lower right. With the California gull, that dipped in ink beak is a really good thing to look for. Again, the characteristic structure, so kind of long and parallel sided on the beak, but then this very dark tip with a pretty sharp dividing line and a very light base. And not to say they're not the only gull out there that has that feature. So, again, you can't just go by one thing, but that's an important clue. If you see that, you should at least be looking for other things that might confirm or exclude California gull as the ID. And the adult California gull, I didn't mention this before, but that sort of black band with a little bit of red behind it, very good thing to look for. That's just about always a lock for California gull when you see that. Ring-billed gull, it's cute beak, somewhat shorter than the California gull beak. In the adult, it's got that ring bill, that dark band with no hint of red on the beak. Pretty much at every age, you're not going to see red on the beak of the ring-billed gull. You know, it's you know, if you look at several thousand of these gulls, they get almost straightforward. You're like, oh yeah, and then the ones that look different jump out more. And Heermann's gull, again, with its process that it goes through, its sequence. So I don't know, is that helpful?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think, you know, with gulls, it's always worth taking another look. You know, we do live in a great place to go see gulls. You know, when I don't have a lot of time to go birding, I just drive down to the end of Linden Avenue, and chances are there's going to be a bunch of gulls hanging out there, and I can just sit down and spend a very enjoyable half hour kind of sifting through them. And once in a while, there's something really unusual there. You know, I've seen laughing gulls there. I've seen, you know, other weird things. Franklin's gull there, not that long ago. So we're due for an interesting gull. It's gull migration time. Maybe one will show up.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
for doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Okay, well, anything else before we go? All right, well then I'm going to thank you all for coming, and again, encourage you to go out and bird on Saturday. If you can't go out, or even if you do go out, there will be some sort of a Zoom thing Saturday night to kind of, you know, recap what happened during the Little Big Day. I apologize for being a little behind on the organizing for that. Check carpbirdwatchers.org. There should be something up there by tomorrow, hopefully, that describes, you know, how to go view that Zoom meeting. And I'm looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun. And I will see you all out there. So long, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, John.